The G20 Summit through African eyes, live updates, and expert voices only on Channel Africa.
As South Africa gets ready to host the first Group of 20 gathering on the continent, a recent report showed that 8 in 10 South Africans believe the country is heading in the wrong direction. The United States has pulled out from attending the G20, citing a genocide against Afrikaners. South Africa has been labelled a mafia state, while the water and energy infrastructure across the country crumbles. And to discuss this further, we are joined on the line by Terence McNamee, a geopolitical analyst and a senior fellow of the Montreal Institute for Global Security. Terence, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon.
Now, let's first talk about the article you penned in this week's cover story of the American publication, The Christian Science Monitor, questioning if South Africa can revive the goal of being a non-racial democracy. Do you believe the country can achieve this goal, and how would it need to be done?
Thanks. There's been many things written about South Africa's politics, South Africa's economy, but my story was a bit different. In some ways, it's the story about the story. So the transition story of South Africa from a brutal racial oligarchy into this non-racial democracy. And this was a story that, you know, the new government, the new democratic government in the 1990s was able to leverage for very significant positive impact, both domestically and internationally. And what I try to unpack in the cover story for the Monitor is what happened to that story. It's never talked about anymore, and it's virtually disappeared. And this is a real danger, I think, for South Africa, because as you know, nature abhors a vacuum, and into the vacuum, we see all these other stories that are flooding in, different visions of the future. And what they all have in common, unfortunately, unlike the transition story, the Rainbow Nation story, is that they are exclusive visions of the history, whether it's the Afrikaner nationalists or the radical economic transformation. All of these stories paint a vision of the country that excludes other groups. And I think that's what I was trying to get at in this story.
Do you feel you achieved your goal?
Well, I hope I sensitize people to this issue. And again, you know, the problem with a story, I use the metaphor of a garden, like a garden that you plant. And if you don't take care of that garden, if you don't prune it, if you don't water it, if you don't pick out the weeds, then essentially that garden or that story, to use the metaphor, is going to grow wild or it's going to wilt and die. And if that dies, I think that is really not just a loss for South Africa, but it's a loss for humanity, because this was a story that really inspired the world in the 1990s. And it showed that perhaps regardless of whatever tensions or divisions you have in society, that they are bridgeable. And that was the South African story that really inspired the world in the 90s. And over the last 15 years in particular, it's been marginalized, delegitimized, and I fear that it's almost disappearing.
Now, on to the G20 and just the issues surrounding the U.S. president and the U.S. delegation. You know, what do you make of the fact that the U.S. is saying that they have said that they will not send anyone to attend the event, despite them taking over the G20 chairmanship for next year? You know, what does this mean, and how does this then not only shed light on the U.S. and how they are handling issues that they're not happy about, and how should then South Africa respond to this?
Well, first and foremost, this was the President Trump and the administration telegraphed their absence from as soon as they came into office. And as we know, South Africa has been the target of President Trump's ire on a regular basis for the last 7 or 8 months. And this is for very different reasons. This may have to do with the ICJ case, or it may have to do with domestic politics in the United States and you know, the U.S. culture wars, and how in particular this sort of white genocide issue folds into that quite seamlessly. But I think the bigger question relates to, yes, the United States is not going to be there, but I think we have to look at the utility and the efficacy of the G20 as a whole. It's gone very far from its original roots. And my own sense is that it has to get back to those roots, or it stands the risk of becoming irrelevant.
And let's just go back and talk about the fact that the white genocide is alleged, because it has not been proven that there is a white genocide in South Africa. I think also just moving on to Argentina's president, Javier Milei, who's also now abruptly, but which was kind of expected, because as soon as the US had made they had pronounced their move, then there was an expectation that Argentina would move in that direction. Did you believe that he was going to do it, and as a president of a country and very aligned to the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was clear that the president of Argentina would follow in President Trump's footsteps, but it is worth noting that he is sending, I think, the foreign minister, and they will have a delegation there. So it's not a complete boycott, as it were. But I think, again, the bigger concern is not these individual dropouts. And I don't even think South Africa in particular is the big issue here. But the question is, these global fora in general are really losing their luster. I mean, if you look at the big climate summit in Brazil at the moment, I mean, I think besides the host Lula, there's no other world leader there. Whereas 10 years ago in Paris, I think every world leader was there. So I think the bigger concern is, what is the real utility? Do we have too many of these kind of talk shops? And again, remember, let's just look back to recent G20s. I mean, does anyone remember what substantive came out of Brazil or India? Or again, I think we have to ask some sort of tough questions about these type of gatherings going forward.
Now, with the spotlight on South Africa at this point in time, can the country's government restore public trust? Do you believe that this is a possibility? And if it is, what does the South African government need to do to ensure that they achieve this?
Yeah, I think the first step, of course, is in restoring public trust is to be honest with the population. And I think that's been the big challenge, not just in South Africa, but in other parts of Africa, is that we are knowing more and more about the failings. We're knowing more and more about the things that are going wrong. And that's a good thing. So we have more transparency. We have more commissions, whether that's into policing or the judicial system. But the problem, of course, is you have transparency, but you don't have the other side of the equation, and that is accountability. So it's transparency without accountability. And I think you need both sides of the coin for public trust to be restored, whether it's South Africa or another country. And I think that this is really, really one of the great challenges of democracy in general, and why people are losing faith is because they're becoming more and more aware of all of the challenges and problems, but they're not seeing, frankly, enough people behind bars.
Well, Terence, we have run out of time and are going to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update. That's Terence McNamee, a geopolitical analyst and senior fellow of the Montreal Institute for Global Security, joining us on the line.